Hi, my name is Don Stewart. For some time, I've wanted to assemble a bunch of the old photographs that we have that document the construction of our commercial salmon trawler, the fishing vessel Nightwings. The story of the Nightwings actually began back in about 1978. My wife Charlotte and I were both badly in need of a change. She was a college teacher and I was practicing law, and both of us wanted to do something different for a living. We decided we needed to take a sabbatical. That time, we had owned and lived aboard the sailboat Aspera for nearly 10 years. The Aspera was a lovely 39-foot wooden yawl that had been designed by legendary naval architect John Alden and built back in 1954. We decided to quit our jobs and take a year off. We could cruise the west coast of Canada and the US and spend some time doing what we loved to do best, writing. By about the spring of 1979, we'd spent our year and we were slowly making our reluctant way back south toward Seattle. We both knew we'd have to find new jobs, and neither of us was looking forward to that. Then, on a stopover in Port Townsend, we saw this bare first stage fiberglass hull parked in the work yard at Skookum Marine Construction in the Port Townsend Marina. It was a bare fiberglass hull for a 47-foot sailboat. It had been designed by respected Pacific Northwest marine architect Edwin Monk, who'd also drawn plans for a commercial salmon trawler on this hull. And when I'd been working my way through college and law school, I'd worked as a commercial salmon trawler, and my dad was at the time a commercial salmon trawler. So here was a chance for both of us to earn our living while maybe writing in the wintertime. We saw this hull, and it was love at first sight. We bought the hull, put the Aspera up for sale, and we went to work. The ballast consisted of several thousand pounds of steel punchings immersed in resin and sand and then poured into the keel. Once this had hardened up and was smoothed over, the whole works was heavily sealed in a layer of fiberglass. The next step was bulkheads. Each bulkhead was cut to shape down on the ground, hauled up into the boat, and clamped into place while it was then attached to the hull with fiberglass patches referred to as 8x16s, leaving a little space between the fiberglass and the hull so as to not create a hard spot that would cause fatigue in the fiberglass hull. The gentle camber of the main deck was established by attaching curved pre-cut timbers to the tops of the bulkheads that gave us the curve that we needed. Most of the materials for this job we purchased at a discounted cost plus 10% directly from Skookum Marine. They were very accustomed to dealing with do-it-yourself boat builders. There were several people building boats in the area when we were doing ours. But we still sometimes needed to make a trip to the lumber yard. And of course, we'd sold our cars when we took off the year before for our 1 year sabbatical. But hey, no problem. I had a perfectly good fold-a-bike that worked just fine. Once the bulkheads were in place, the hatches were roughed in and the deck was laid down in 2 layers of half-inch plywood uh, on top. The plywood was laid down in two layers with a middle layer of fiberglass, and the top layer put down over the middle fiberglass layer while it was still wet and screwed down into place. This created a 1-inch plus thick deck, reinforced and laminated with glass in between. Once the plywood decking was in place, the next step was laying down a covering of fiberglass that tied in the hatches and also attached the deck securely to the outer hull. Then we covered in the center of the boat while I built the trunk cabin. The roof beams were laminated out of 1x4 Philippine mahogany on a jig that I built inside the shop. And with that framework in place, and once the roof was put on, the tent came off, the plywood roof on the trunk cabin went down, and the whole works was securely glassed over again. Here's a shot of a visit from my mom and dad, who were at the time themselves completing their own project, the building of a heavy 47-foot commercial salmon troller that would become the Lady Anne. I'm goofing off landing a fish here while my dad dresses and cleans one. So then it was finally time to get started on the pilot house, which of course required another tent. And it was time to get to work building the engine beds. Then the day arrived for installation of the new engine. The tarp was removed so that the engine could be lowered into place, and you'll note that this had to be done before we built the pilot house roof. We purchased a new 453 Jimmy diesel, which was about 120 horsepower, and had it shipped up from Seattle. And as you can imagine, the installation of this engine was pretty unnerving. It all went well, and here's the engine resting on its new beds and a boat builder who is very relieved. It turned out everything had fit just fine. If you take a look here, just aft of the engine, you'll see a large opening that opens out into the fish hold. This was how the engine would later be removed in case it ever needed to be repaired or replaced. It would go out through that door into the fish hold and up out through the fish hatch. Then, of course, back went the tent for the completion of the pilot house. And then finally, with the pilot house roof on, the tent could be removed and the whole works buttoned up with fiberglass. And here you see a shot of the boat from the distance with its new profile. For those of you who might be interested, the 7-window curved front pilot house you see here with windows on the corners was important to the modern but classic look of this final boat. There's a right and a wrong way to build these curved front pilot houses. The actual windows themselves were installed later after we'd driven the boat down to Fisherman's Terminal in Seattle. And of course, there was yet more fiberglass work now needed to seal all this up for the approaching winter. And of course, a color gel coat needed to go on. I should note that Charlotte was very good at putting on fiberglass, had just the right mix of patience and determination to do a good job of it. I wasn't so good at it. Of course, her claim is that all of this is the Tom Sawyer in me telling her all of that. And I'll just take the fifth. Soon, however, winter was truly upon us, and it got very cold outside. With winter closing in, it was time to get serious about work inside the boat, which included the building of integral fuel tanks, integral fiberglass fuel tanks. There were 2 wing tanks either side of the engine. These were about 350 gallons each. And you can see, reaching down into them, that building those tanks was a big job. There was also another fuel tank of about 200 gallons or so down beneath the floor under the trunk cabin, and a water tank of about 250 gallons. That brought the total fuel capacity up to roughly 900 gallons of diesel. These were all gel coated, the baffles, and before they were enclosed. All this fiberglass work was messy business, to say the least. And when it was underway, the interior of the boat filled with styrene fumes, so definitely not inhabitable without the use of a respirator. So once the interior of the tanks was complete, the tanks then had a lid installed, and fuel fill openings and fuel pickups were installed in the lids later for plumbing. All of this work was done before the interior of the pilot house was completed. You'll note in this picture the engine is covered by a tarp and is beneath what will later become the pilot house floor. You might also note the former dress shirt that I'm wearing in this picture being put to a quite suitable use, I think. Maybe I won't be going back into court wearing this shirt anytime soon. With the tanks done, the next step was making the stainless and aluminum hardware. These were items that we could have spent a great deal of money on, that included things like the masthead cap, the mast step plate, the spreaders, bow rollers, side railings, a rudder shoe, that kind of thing. I designed them all, cut them from stainless steel and aluminum that I purchased in a steel surplus steel shop. They were assembled and clamped together for welding, and then actually stuck together by a very skilled local welder, one of Skookum Marine's employees, who did some per hour work in the evenings on the side. The shaft tube, shaft, stern bearing, and stuffing box were all assembled as a unit and then installed inside the engine room and inside the shaft alley. And all that was done before the engine was aligned and secured. By this time, shown in the picture, the engine probably would have been all aligned and bolted into place. And here I am installing the propeller. Then the rudder shoe was installed, and the rudder shaft and bearing and the rudder itself was bolted into place. By this time, I probably had installed or was installing the hydraulic steering system inside the boat. Charlotte, meanwhile, also designed and painted the name on the boat, which became something of a trademark for us in the years that followed. Skookum Marine had a new wooden mast that they had apparently unused, not used for some reason or another. It was stored on the front roof of their building, but it was perfect for us. They made us a deal on it, and we went to work on the rigging, the spreaders. This day in the picture is installation day for the mast being stepped. The picture on the far right, by the way, that you're looking at, it looks like there are two masts on our boat, but actually the second mast is on the boat in the distance. Ours was rigged with a single mast as a cutter. Uh, and if you look at these pictures and take a look in the first shot, top of the mast, you can see the masthead fitting that we created. You can see the spreaders in place, and you can also see the pole spreaders that will hold the trolling poles when they go up. Skookum Marine owned some nearby wooded acreage. In fact, I think it's the same land that you're looking at in the distance in this shot. They let us and another boat builder cut our trolling poles there. The poles were then hauled in, barked, sealed, and left to season next to the boat for a month or two, providing a workspace for me. Meanwhile, Charlotte did all of the prep work and painting on the bottom of the boat, which was a very big, awkward job, which she did without any help from me. And here she is actually applying the bottom paint. You can see from the picture just what a huge job that was. Note in this picture that the poles are now in place. We wanted to have them in place before we took the boat down to Seattle because we hoped to obtain moorage at Fisherman's Terminal, and we wanted to make sure that we definitely did look like a commercial fishing boat. At the time, this has changed, I think, now, but at the time, only commercial fishing boats were allowed to moor at Fisherman's Terminal in Seattle. In this picture, you can see that we've got the steering wheel in place, and if you look, you see the two black tubes or hoses coming out beneath the steering console. Those are for the hydraulic steering. You can also see that the instrument panel is in place, and right here in the foreground, the exhaust is also in place for the engine. The sloping panel just above the wheel there is where the engine controls will go, but obviously they were not yet built. And you can also maybe see in this picture that there are plastic windows, little thin plexiglass windows that we put in place in the pilot house for our trip down to Seattle. Those were just temporary while we waited after we got down to Seattle to have the permanent windows made. And here we are on the big day of the launch of the boat. And here, of course, is the trip to the launching platform, the launching pier. You can get a pretty good idea of the shape and form of the boat at this point from this picture. And here's the happy new skipper tying the boat up for the very first time. Once we got the boat down to Seattle, Charlotte returned to work at Everett Community College, and I went to work completing the woodwork. This picture was taken at a later date, but it shows the entry door, the rain hood, and the drop-in bottom panel that we left in place when at sea, and a top panel that was also folded down sometimes in the rain to provide ventilation. Here's a shot in the pilot house. It shows the overhead of the pilot house and what it ended up looking like. Here's the galley. It shows the cooler, the galley sink, the cupboards beyond, and the bronze port light that you see at the top of that shot was one of several that we obtained at, I thought, a pretty good price from, believe it or not, a furniture store in Bellevue. They were intending to sell those as coffee tables, and we had, I think, a much better use for them. Here's the oil stove. You can see the bread warming shelves above the oil stove in this picture. Here's a shot up through the companionway looking forward. Off to the left, what you see are some bookshelves that we installed in what was our study down in the trunk cabin. Here's a picture showing the front berth to the port and then to the starboard. And here's a picture of the carpenter, a shot of me after much of this work had come together. This shot of the boat was taken a few years later, so this is probably around 1985. It shows the completed boat fully fitted out, so you can see the ironbark rails and guards, the exterior trim, the finished wood windows now fully in place, the fishing gear mounted aft, an aluminum boom with a riding sail, a radar, the anchor winch, aluminum safety railings for the afterdeck, and significantly, it's got our Alaska Department of Fish and Game license number printed on the side per Alaska regulations. This is a shot of the boat, a much cleaner version before several of the things you saw in the previous picture or in the earlier pictures had been installed. Here we are headed north, our first year of fishing. You'll note that there's no radar, no safety railings, and you can see the boat's boiling right along. Nightwings did about 8 knots at 1800 RPM on its 453 Jimmy engine. This is a shot of the boat halfway up through Canada. We're tied up here for the night at a town called Buttedale. At the time, it was already abandoned and beginning to disintegrate. A very, very scenic, nifty little place to visit. But we later on became unable to stop here for the night. Little of what you see even in this picture now remains. I believe this is considered to be mostly a ghost town today, although there may still be, or there may have been some people that came in later as hardcore residents. The dock we're tied to very shortly after this picture was taken no longer existed. While we fished in Alaska, we home ported in the town of Hoonah. It was a lovely place on icy straits in northern southeast Alaska, roughly a 1,000-mile run from Seattle, so about 10 days at 100 miles per day, and that would be at 8 knots, you'd do close to 100 miles in a day, and then we'd stay overnight, usually tie up or anchor up for the night. The pier in this shop is the Hoonah Seafoods Pier. This is where we sold our fish, and the new state-built marina was off to your left in this photograph. Charlotte and I generally fish the ocean off of Yacobi Island, but that was about 4 hours west of Hoonah, out on the Pacific Ocean, North Pacific. But when we ever could, we also loved to fish the calm inside waters of icy straits, not far from Hoonah. Here you've got a shot of the boat hard at work. You might note the floats towing behind the boat. We would tow 4 trolling lines with maybe 20 or 30 lures, and during a significant part of the season would focus on Chinook and then later on catching coho and pink salmon. Charlotte usually drove the boat, navigated the shoreline, and kept us on the fish while I did the scut work out back, but we very often reversed roles. I guess you can see from her smile this must have beat teaching for a living. Here it looks like we're having a very good day of fishing. You might note that most of these fish on the deck are Chinook salmon, worth anywhere from $50 to $100 each at the buyer. Definitely something to smile about. Here we are selling fish at Hoonah Seafoods. Tied up next to us is my mom and Dad's boat, the Lady Anne. That's my dad helping me unload. I'm down in the hold removing fish from the ice and tossing them up into the bucket. The fish were then raised to the top of the pier and weighed and sorted, and we would then go up to the office and get our check. It was like cash on the barrelhead. Very satisfying to salt away that check at the end of each trip. We put in 9 fishing seasons with the Nightwings and lived aboard this boat for over a decade. Then, in about 1992, our lives had moved on and we sold the boat to a very nice couple from Port Orchard, Washington. They also took the Nightwings back fishing in Alaska. In this picture is the day when they came to pick the boat up. Here it is backing out of our slip for the final time at Fisherman's Terminal. This is its final departure out from Fisherman's Terminal and into the Lake Washington Ship Canal. And here it is in the locks, locking out toward Puget Sound. And then finally heading out to the Sound toward Port Orchard and her new future. Charlotte and I have very strong, fond memories of the fishing vessel Nightwings. This is a shot of her fishing off of Pleasant Island in icy straits. Today, however, we're both retired and we are both writers. We invite you to check out our fiction and nonfiction books at our respective websites at charlottestewart.com and donstewart.net. I very much hope you enjoyed this brief recollection of how the Nightwings came to be. Thank you.